Welcome to the Restaurant Roadmap Podcast, powered by Synergy Restaurant Consultants, your go-to source for actionable insights and real-world strategies from the industry's top experts, clients, and special guests. Whether you're building a new concept or refining an existing one, we're here to help you create a forward-thinking, sustainable brand, elevate guest experience, streamline operations, and maximize your bottom line. With decades of hands-on experience, our mission is simple: to deliver practical, proven solutions to the everyday challenges restaurant operators face. Let's dive in and get to work. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Restaurant Roadmap Podcast, powered by Synergy Restaurant Consultants. I am really excited to have this wonderful conversation today with these two lovely ladies. We have Christina Teves. Hello, Christina. How are you today?
Hi, Danny. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. And Lisa Frazier. Lisa, how are you?
I am doing well. Thanks. Glad to be here.
So I'm going to ask, because this is a really special topic, today's subject is the inclusive table. And I know there is going, well, what the heck does that mean? So I'm going to ask Christina to introduce herself, tell us about her and her company as a special guest, and what exactly that means and sort of how we're going to frame this conversation today. So Christina, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be here with you both today. And I'm really excited and honored to have this conversation. It's really important. So I have a consultancy called Say Sorbet, and I specialize in healthcare and nonprofit communications. And a big part of what I do is raise awareness around different types of voices. And in this case, for this discussion that we're having today, it's around the intellectual and developmental disability community and the neurodivergent community. And I'm going to turn to Lisa for her signal here. But one thing that I think is really important for any operator to hear in this conversation is this can feel really overwhelming. And the point is to start having the conversation because it's really important. And so instead of getting into the weeds in terms of different language usage, because language is very personal, and especially across all of these individuals, we think about person first versus identity first. What I'm going to do with Lisa's permission is simply say the IDD community and the neurodivergent community. And Lisa, is that something, as someone with lived experience, is that okay with you if I do it that way?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, great. And I said this to Danny before, disclaimer, I'm not a clinical professional. I'm a communications consultant that works with wonderful organizations across healthcare that broaden access to these communities. So definitely do your own research and talk to people that are much more qualified than me.
Lisa, introduce yourself. You're a key member of the Synergy team, but beyond that, you have some experiences along this line as well. So I'm going to give you a chance to chime in before we start moving into some really good topics. Go ahead.
Yes, as Danny said, I have been a key member of the Synergy team. This month will be 9 years, working on all things administrative and operations, helping to manage the Synergy consulting team. But outside of that, I am a parent of 3 adult children. My middle son or middle child is an adult with a disability. He is 25 and living his best life. And so I am bringing the lived experience perspective to this conversation and sharing my insight and experience about this and how operators can maybe approach what they do when working with this community and what they can do to improve the experiences for people with disabilities. And so just looking to add my perspective to the conversation.
Yeah, and just to add, I have a niece who is a Down syndrome. She's in her 30s, I think, now. So I have a little bit of experience, but not nearly as closely as you guys have. So what I wanted to ask, Christina, before we get into the topics here, you have restaurant experience. You were a trainer for many years. So bringing that relationship of restaurant experience, training, and a comfort level so that people can help make it a more comfortable and enjoyable experience. And, not to sound, I don't want to make this sound like a sales thing, but it does help make you top of mind when people are looking for a place to go and giving them the comfort and the help to have a great experience, right? So you tell us quickly about your restaurant background.
Oh, of course. I mean, I grew up in the restaurant industry. I held every single role, I think, besides line cook. So I was very much front of the house. I was a manager. I was a trainer, as you mentioned, Danny. And restaurants are just a place for me that I've always found joy. I loved working there and moved to corporate years ago and did some work behind the scenes, which was so fun. But the training aspect, especially in a casual environment, it's changed so much. And I think about the way that I used to train and I was trained many, many years ago, going back into the archives, and it doesn't cut it anymore. It's really about communicating with your staff and empowering your staff to be able to communicate with their guests in a way that resonates with them and makes them comfortable. And you said this earlier, Danny, trying to be mindful about how we're approaching this. And it's not about sales. And it's not, but it does connect back. Because when you think about opening up different lines of communication and different training aspects that allow a family to come in and bring their loved ones in for a meal and create a memory, that's a wonderful gift. And yes, it does relate back to sales. And that's okay, in my opinion.
Well, and it's a way, we always talk about giving back. And I perceive my way of giving back to this industry as being a consultant, helping people with whatever knowledge I have. And this is a way of giving back also to, people in the community that want to enjoy a good experience. And we're going to help you figure out how to do that. I know Lisa's going to chime in, experiences she may have had going out to dinner, if there was any, things just to look for to put people at ease, right? But we're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about that exactly is, our first topic here is reducing anxiety so that people, how do you make it comfortable for people to want to come into your restaurant? What can you do to I hate to say ease the pain, but let's just use it just because that's all I can think of at the moment. So,
Lisa, what about you? What are things that you've looked for in the past that lessened anxiety and made you feel like you and your family could go in a less stressful environment?
For us, it's more about, is it a welcoming type of environment just from the minute you walk through the door? My son's disability isn't the type where the sensory overload is a big factor, although I know a lot of people in his community that is a factor. So for us, loud, chaotic doesn't usually affect him. In fact, for him, he loves that type of environment. But for us, it's more looking at how he's treated, if he is spoken to directly versus a server or a host talking to us and completely ignoring the fact that he's an adult, assuming that he's younger than he is. We've had instances where he's been brought like a kid's menu, even though he's in his 20s. We've had we have like a running joke in our family called sippy cups, where he's had cups with lids and straws brought when, he hasn't had those type of drinks brought to him. It's just looking and not having the service staff make any assumptions at all. And if there's any questions, to just raise them versus making those types of assumptions initially.
Christina, what would you like to add to that?
Well, I want to comment on something Lisa said because it's really powerful and it's something that you can immediately change when you're thinking about going back to the training aspect. You always address the individual. You always do that. It's respectful. It is treating someone with care. And my tip would be give it a few breaths, give it 10 seconds. And then if that person, in fact, has a caregiver or someone that wants to communicate for them or support their communication, they will chime in. Like, it's just, this family has gone out to dinner before. And so I always say, take a couple beats, and that is going to set the stage for the rest of the meal and for that family's experience. Because I can't imagine an assumption being made about me, and that's a privilege, right? And so I'm very mindful about that. I also think Lisa, you brought up a really great point in terms of the sensory overload, and your son is okay with that and maybe thrives and enjoys it. And there are other individuals who, do not respond to that at all. And I think back to, again, going back into the archives when I worked for a chain restaurant, famous for their margaritas. And we were told to shake the shaker all the way to the table and shake it at the table. And I think about that now, and I think about the music's playing. There's a lot of chatter in the restaurant. I'm shaking a margarita. And that is just not something I would ever tell any type of wait staff to do in this day and age. It's a lot. That is sensory overload. And so one thing that is really simple to do, and it's free, use your social media as a way to give some guidelines to potential customers and guests. So you can talk a little bit about the environment. You can say, between the hours of 4 and 5, it's very quiet. Or we have football on, every Sunday, and give people some insight as to what the environment looks like, because it's interesting. You could be thinking that you're making customizations or maybe accommodations for certain communities, but you're probably really broadening your reach and you don't even realize it. I mean, I think about parents with a newborn baby that might want to come in during quiet hours because they want to eat while the baby's sleeping. So there are just so many things you can do, and social is such an easy way to start doing that.
And you referenced in one of our previous conversations preparing for this the 50% rule. You want to describe the 50% rule? What do you mean by that?
The 50% rule is if you can take half of the anxiety away from a family before they enter the door, you've won. Because they're probably coming in already preparing, and Lisa, I'll let you comment on that, but they're probably coming in already thinking about a million things that could go wrong or all the typical things that happen. So if you can think about eliminating half of their anxiety before they walk through the front door, you've won, and it can only go up from there, in my opinion.
Lisa, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for some families, there's so much anxiety, wondering what could occur with their loved one, worried about how they may react in that restaurant and whether or not they're going to make it through a meal, or is mom going to have to step out with the adult or child, or is it going to be disruptive to the fellow patrons? And for some families, there is a lot of anxiety just, with the idea and pre-planning and, having extra snacks or an iPad or some other technology or things that they can use as distractions in the event that things start to go off the rails. So there's a lot of pre-planning and things that may go into the planning process for a family that other people may not even give a second thought. Most people just say, hey, let's go out to dinner. The biggest decision is where are we going to go? But for a family with neurodivergent family members, it's a lot more nuanced than that. And they have to think a little bit more about where they're going to go and pre-plan for what that might look like for their loved one.
Let me throw this question out. I'm kind of known for going off script, as I'm sure you guys, Christina, this is the first one. But, when we talk greeters and when we write training documentation for greeters, one of the things we say is always have at the greeter stand a booklet that has, hours of operation, that has emergency numbers, that has all of these things so that they can use it as a reference when somebody calls or whatever. So if you were going to have something like that at the greeter stand, which is really usually the point of first connectivity, right? Would you do that to help, again, helping our operators make this as easy as possible? Could you have a little checklist or a little something there beyond incorporating this into your training, but just what to do if you get a call or you have a guest come in, just to help make it comfortable, consistent, in a consistent way with the right knowledge and the right terminology. So I guess that was a long question. Right?
That was a great question. It was a great question. And it's part of the training, right? You're giving another point of reference for your staff. So yes, you include it in the general overall training. You're creating a playbook for your staff. But again, it's one of those things that I think goes across different audiences, because you could have a family with an elderly person, or you could have just different circumstances where a little thoughtfulness and care goes a long way. I think as a society, we've lost our idea about closeness. And I don't know if you're Seinfeld fans, but I think about that episode with the close talker. And, this guy was always like right in front of people's faces. And it's funny, and I laugh at it because we think about personal space. And so when you think about these, communities, and you think about personal space, it benefits everybody. So yeah, I would absolutely keep that at the front. And it's a nice reminder to follow through and have, a great mindset.
I was going to add to that and say, oftentimes when you're making a reservation, there's sometimes an extra question that says, is this a special occasion? If there could be an extra question, like, is there any special accommodation that we could include, or even a couple check boxes that could be incorporated. And, to Christina's point, I often go out with my elderly mom, and that has actually been a sort of eye-opening experience as well, because her ability to, just be mobile. I mean, she is still mobile, but she walks really slow. And if she's going to have to maneuver even a couple stairs, it could be a little bit problematic. So I think adding that into training materials, just to ask those questions in placing a reservation, just to have, some accommodation type probing questions, I think could be really, really beneficial in making sure that the restaurant is prepared when the party arrives with that information ahead of time.
Yeah, I really, I honestly think that's one of those throw down the mic comments. I think that's great, because having that question, especially if you're a restaurant that takes reservations, to help organize where that party is going to get seated and planning for that. And then that to me would be like, the guest is going to go, wow, that was really thoughtful of them to ask that. And those are things we live with, sort of subliminal memories. You may not necessarily remember that something happened, but in there somewhere it's there, and you remember it, just subliminally when the time comes. And that's just something that I think would be just a differentiator to ask those kind of questions, and then you'll be remembered the next time. And so again, we're not trying to look at this as a sales driving tool, but it's about how do you help people, passionately, and treating people with respect, right? It looked like you were going to say something there, Christina.
No, you both were sparking ideas for me, because Lisa, thank you for sharing that story about your mom. And I love how you were describing, anything else we should know. And operators can take that a step further, and they can think about empathetic language. They can think about inclusive language. And we were saying this earlier, but the front of the host stand checklist ties in with training, right? So think about when your server comes to your table. What I would love to see is, regardless of who's sitting in those seats, who's around that table, I would like a server to say, is there anything I can do to make your experience more comfortable today? And let the guest tell you, well, it's really loud, or I'm not comfortable in this chair, or I don't like where I'm seated. Or if they say, we're great. It's a really simple question that just goes back to communicating. It also just gives people an opportunity to feel like they're in control. And I think that ultimately lessens anxiety as well.
And it just goes back to respect and caring, like we said before. So, yeah, so moving into the server, let's talk about menu flexibility here, which is another topic we wanted to make sure we talked about. So, Lisa, have you had instances where you need help, or Jeremy needs help with menu selection, menu differentiation, and substitution, anything like that you'd want to point out to us?
Thankfully, I'm very fortunate because he's a very adventurous eater. So he can usually find just about anything that he likes on the menu. But I know that that's fairly unique. And so, yes, I know that is a very that's a very big issue amongst the community, in that they oftentimes, have very particular palates, or sometimes textures are an issue. And so they may need to make modifications, or may want to choose items that may, as an adult, may be more traditional on a kid's menu, or, things of that nature. So it is something that is, pretty common within the community. And so offering that flexibility, I think, is really important. An important aspect to that is, just being flexible with ordering, offering simpler choices, substitutions, even if they're not traditional substitutions. I've heard people who, will want mac and cheese and French fries, which is typically two things that would be paired up together, but oftentimes are what a person may choose because for whatever reason.
Because they sound amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I
so,
do that all the time.
yeah. And so making it, very normal, normalizing that, and saying, yeah, we can absolutely serve that plain or on the side. And so it not being a big production to accommodate something like that. Even my other son, who doesn't have special needs, he's always been the plain and dry, meat, cheese, bun. That's the way he orders his burger. And he doesn't have special need. That's just the way he prefers to eat. So just making it easy and flexible to make those types of accommodations, I think, goes a really long way. And to not make it a big deal, to make it very simple for the person and the family to make those types of modifications, and not make them feel like they're asking for something very challenging to do.
Making them comfortable. Yeah, and I'll tell you, I mean, I have a bit of a disability. As you guys know, I had some oral health challenges within the last couple of years. And, I always appreciate if I need to make a special request, extra sauce, this or that. Funny story, I was in Chicago over Christmas, and there was a pepper cheese Italian, very traditional Italian pasta dish, right? Pepe cacio, or cacio e pepe, right? And I asked, long noodles are difficult for me because it's hard, right? So I asked if they could change to a shorter penne, whatever they had, right? And the server came back and said, the chef will not change the pasta on that dish. And I was like, okay, this is just so ridiculous. But to reinforce your point of, I don't know why that was such a difficult accommodation to make. But, it certainly would have been no big deal and would have made me a very happy camper. So instead, we had a great experience, but that subliminally, I'm talking about it now, that happened 3 months ago, right? So it's still something.
Well, because I mean, you tell me if I'm right here, but you're remembering how it made you feel. That's really important. And if we're talking about an environment or a restaurant that's casual, we're not talking about, fine dining in Napa Valley, where there's probably no substitutions for that. But it's not acceptable in my opinion, to not make substitutions. I'm gluten-free. I substitute everything under the sun, and I'm very kind about it. I ask questions. I'm not celiac. I'm very clear. I take the burden off of, my server and say, I will be fine if there's cross-contamination. But it doesn't make sense to me as to why you wouldn't offer substitutions. And Lisa, you said this, your other son is like playing this, playing that. And I think about family members of mine, grown adults who only want to eat chicken fingers, and, those are on the kids menu, and the server saying, we can't do that. I get it. We'll do a double portion. No, we're not doing. We'll pay extra. No. It's just like, why are you making this so hard for us to have an enjoyable meal? It doesn't feel right.
And you also, is there anything else you want to add in terms of menu or portion or choices, Christina?
Really quickly, I'll say that it's free. I mean, most of these things, if we're talking about casual or fast casual environments, they're not hard to do. And so I think if as an operator, just getting your team on the same page in terms of, and Lisa, you said it, I'll use mac and cheese as an example. It's going to be in my head all night now. Now I'm going to have that for dinner. But that does cost more, right? So if someone wants a substitute, it's an upcharge. Are you okay with that? Yes. Okay, great. And move on. So I think it's just identifying, is it a price issue, a cost issue? Is it Danny, like your chef, I don't want to do it. Is it that kind of issue? So, yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's just trying to be accommodating because it always comes back around, and then you become top of mind when you're going out the next time. So before we go through closing comments here, is there anything else that we want to touch on or bring up that you feel like we missed or need to talk to or talk about? Lisa, you good?
Well, one of the things that I think that we probably have touched on a little bit, but I think is really important, and I think this applies to a lot of different people, is, I think if we just slow the overall interaction a little bit, I think this goes a really long way. It gives people more time to process. It gives people more time to answer. I know my son's processing time, sometimes there may be a 5-second delay for him to process what's being asked and a few second delay in him formulating a response. So if we just slow the interaction down a little bit, I think that goes a really long way. And ask fewer rapid fire questions. I think that goes a long way, not just for people that are neurodivergent, but also the elderly community. I've noticed my mom has slowed down in that way a lot. And we have to really slow down the way that we have interactions. And I just think about just the society as a whole, and people are so anxious now, just as a whole. And I think if we could just kind of take a breath and not be in such a hurry about everything, I think it would go such a long way. So if we could just try to slow interactions down a little bit, I think if we're asking people about if they would benefit from quieter seating, I think it's important that we don't make it awkward. We don't have to make it an awkward situation. Like, we have quieter tables if you would prefer, or something like that, because sometimes, there are sensory sensitivities, as we mentioned, but also sometimes there's hearing loss. Again, I'm using my mom as an example. So that could be, a factor that people may not think about. I think we talked about the flexibility in ordering. I think that's very, very important. The patient in communication differences, my son speaks kind of slowly. Some people are a lot less verbal than he is. And so, just being sensitive to that, or they may look to their support person, whether it's a parent or whoever they're with, they may look to them if they're having difficulty being able to communicate. So doing their best not to rush them or talk over them or make assumptions of what they're trying to say, because their support people notice that right away. And so, just taking that breath to let them finish. And I think it's just really important that looking at it and having families, like my family, we're not really looking for special treatment per se. What we're looking for is patience, dignity, flexibility. I don't want my family or my son to feel like a burden. We just want to feel comfortable. And if we do, we're going to be loyal and we're going to come back and we're going to feel comfortable and it's going to last. So if I come away with those feelings, then I'm a customer for life. So those things go a really long way. So if there's ways that operators can build that into their training and build that into their culture, they will build some loyal customers.
And let me ask you, Lisa, just on that subject. And the other point I wanted to make was, at this point, it's not just disabled or those types, but, all of it, we're the boomers, there's a huge boomer population. And so that whole idea of slowing down, accommodating, they may not feel like there's a need, but there really is, whether that is hearing or diet or whatever. So I think that's a really amazing point. And I think the real world for you, because you live it, do you have a list of restaurants that when you go out, you go to because you feel like they do accommodate your needs, or that you won't go to because you've had a bad experience?
There's definitely ones that I won't go to. We had a really interesting experience. It was when I was in New York. So it wasn't a restaurant that I would go to regularly because we were on a trip. But we had a situation where we were with a group. It was a fairly big group. And my son was at the table with us. And there were two other individuals with disabilities. So of the table, three out of the like 8 had disabilities. And the service was good. And I felt like we were handled, in the way in which they spoke was fine and everything. But what happened was my son got up to go to the bathroom, and where we were seated, we were in a round table, and we were sort of at an elevated location that was like there was 2 steps down to like a bar area, and there were servers and bartenders standing near this bar area. And my son didn't realize or somehow didn't notice that there were 2 steps to go down. So when he went to step down, he must have missed one of the steps. So he literally fell face first. My back was turned, so I didn't see what happened, but I heard it. So I immediately turned. And of course, my whole table stood up to make sure he was okay, but not a single person from the restaurant, even though they all saw what happened, went to him or asked him if he was okay. They all just looked and watched him fall. And I was so mortified by that because it wouldn't have taken any effort on their part for any of them. They didn't even have to move. They were literally 10, steps, not even 10 steps, maybe, a foot away, could have just asked. And I was so shocked by their behavior. And I don't know if it's because he had a disability and they didn't know if they could speak to him or if he would speak back to them. But I was so mortified by the fact that not a single person.
No, that's terrible, Lisa. That's absolutely horrific, actually.
He was okay. And, and he went all the way down, not like barely, like face first. So, that really took me by surprise, and it completely changed my experience and what had been nice to that point. And it was a gigantic bill. So we had spent a lot of money in food and drink. And I thought, I will never come back here. And anybody who ever asks me, I'll say, steer clear of this place, just because even though the food and the service was good, that one thing completely changed my opinion of that place. So yeah, I think there are places where I would absolutely stay away from if we've had a bad experience, and if they are kind. And I've had experiences where people go out of their way to spend time with my son or talk to him or connect with him. And yeah, we go back to those places frequently.
Well, yeah, it's amazing. Anybody, I don't care, disability, not, you go help somebody. That's just sort of my thought.
Agreed. Lisa, I'm sorry you went through that. I'm sorry your son had to experience that.
Well, Christina, I'm going to turn it over to you to bring it home. And this has been great. So what else would you like to add and close us out?
Oh, that's a huge responsibility. I'll try to keep up to it. So, well, you both teed it up really well for me. I'm hearing it costs nothing to be kind. And so there are just very basic human focused things that operators can do to make everybody feel included and to make everybody feel welcome. And I think a big part of that is preparing with care. So we talked about training a little bit. We talked about that checklist at the front. And I think about it, Lisa, I think about your mom, and I think about my family members and friends of mine, and how would I want someone to treat them if I'm not there? And I think wait staff and operators should think that way too, just being mindful of care. And, restaurants are supposed to be of service. I mean, it is the service industry. And so anyways, there's that. But I do think operators can look at 1 to 3 things that they can change tomorrow. I mean, we talked about social media, different things you're already doing, just kind of go a level deeper. And again, keep inclusivity in mind. And there's a lot of different resources. I think barrier is understanding all of the different communities, and it can feel very overwhelming. And we also want to be respectful and make sure that we're speaking about people and representing them the right way. And there are lots of resources online that you can go and learn more and feel a little bit more empowered to start having that conversation with your staff. And we're having this conversation, and it is a National IDD Awareness Month. So it's just a great time to maybe do the same, and operators can talk to their team and say, okay, what can we do for the rest of the year and beyond to, again, create inclusive experiences, because everybody deserves a great meal. And, that's the point, right?
Yeah, so the month is March, correct? Just to repeat that again. So keep that in mind. And I think, again, just being caring, that's why we're in this business, right? We are definitely a people's business. And we want people to have a great experience, and that's what you get remembered for. Or you get remembered for something like Lisa experienced, which isn't very good. So, all right. I want to thank you guys. Lisa, thank you so much. This has been a great, and you don't see how fast time goes, right? This is like crazy, So thank you very much for helping and providing all of that information. Christina, thank you so much. Hopefully we can do this again at some point in the future. Remember, everybody, feedback, comments, subjects that you'd like us to talk about. If you have questions, we put your question in a podcast. We're going to give you a free 30-minute consultation with one of our experts. Could be Christina in this regard, or Lisa. info@therestaurantroadmap.com. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
A great period of time. Very informative. Appreciate it so much. Everybody, have a great rest of your day. Take care. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's episode gave you valuable insights you can put into action. If you have questions, want more info on today's topic, or need support with your restaurant-specific challenges, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out anytime at info@restaurantroadmap.com and visit synergyrestaurantconsultants.com to explore our services, sign up for our newsletter, and catch up on past episodes. Don't forget to follow and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, so you never miss what's next. Do you have feedback or a topic you'd like us to cover? Contact us. We're here to help make the world a better place to eat.